I caught her before she fell. She showed up on my doorstep at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and I almost didn't recognize her at first, not because she looked different, but because I had never seen my sister look so small. Rachel has always been the taller one. Not by much, just an inch. But she carried herself like it was a foot. She walked into every room like she owned it. That was her thing. That was always her thing. But the woman standing on my porch that night was not that woman. She had a split lip. There was bruising along her left cheekbone, already turning that deep purple green that means it's been there a few hours. She was wearing a long-sleeve shirt in the middle of August. And I knew before she said a single word that the sleeves were not because she was cold. I pulled her inside. I didn't ask anything for the first few minutes. I sat her down at my kitchen table, got her a glass of water, and just let her breathe. She sat there with both hands wrapped around the glass, staring at the surface of the water like she was reading something in it. Then she looked up at me and said, "I didn't know where else to go." "You don't need a reason to come here," I said. "This is always where you go." She nodded, and then she started to cry. Not the loud, gasping kind, the quiet kind, where someone has been holding it in so long that when it finally comes out, it barely makes a sound. I pulled my chair around to her side of the table and put my arm around her, and I just let her cry. I didn't ask her to explain anything. I didn't ask her to stop. I just stayed there, and I kept thinking about the fact that she was sitting in my kitchen instead of her own house, and that told me everything I needed to know about what her house had become. When she finally settled, I asked her quietly, "Who did this?" She didn't answer right away. She ran her thumb along the rim of the glass. "Rachel." "Daniel," she said. "Daniel. Her husband of 4 years. The man I had stood next to her at the altar to witness her marry. The man our father had shaken hands with and said, 'Take care of my daughter.' The man who had given a toast at their wedding reception about how Rachel was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and how he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew it. That man." I kept my voice very steady. "How long?" She looked down. "A while." "How long is a while, Rachel?" She was quiet for a moment. "About 2 years." 2 years. She had been living like this for 2 years, and I had not known. I went over every visit in my mind, every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every time I had looked at my sister and thought she seemed tired, or distracted, or a little quieter than usual, and I had told myself it was just stress, just the busyness of adult life, just one of those things. I had not looked hard enough. That's the truth of it, and I've had to sit with that. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. "Because I knew what you would do," she said, "and I was scared of what would happen after." She wasn't wrong. I want to be honest about that. Rachel has always known me better than almost anyone, and she knew that if I found out, I would not handle it quietly. But I also understood, in that moment, that her fear of what I might do had kept her trapped inside something that was hurting her, and that broke something in me. "Does he know you're here?" I asked. "No." He went out. I had maybe an hour window. "An hour window," I repeated. I let that phrase sit in the air between us. An hour window. Like she was a prisoner calculating a guard rotation. I asked her to show me her arms. She hesitated. Then she pushed up her left sleeve. The bruising went from her wrist to the inside of her elbow. Old and new, layered on top of each other like a timeline. I didn't say anything. I pulled her sleeve back down gently and held her hand. "You're not going back," I said. "It's not that simple," she said immediately. "I know it's not simple. I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying you're not going back tonight." She shook her head slowly. "He'll come looking. He always comes looking. And when he finds me, it's worse. The last time I tried to stay at Mom's for a few days, he showed up and..." She stopped. It was worse. I understood then that this was not just about Daniel's anger. It was about the architecture of control he had built around her over 4 years, brick by brick, until the walls were so high she couldn't see over them anymore. He had isolated her. He had taken away her sense of what was normal. He had made her believe that every exit led somewhere more dangerous. That is what people don't understand about situations like my sister's. They ask, why didn't she just leave? As if leaving were simply a matter of walking out a door. But when someone has spent years making you afraid of the door starts to feel like the most dangerous place in the room. We talked for 3 hours that night. I learned things about my sister's life over the past 4 years that I wish I could unknow. The way he monitored her phone, The way he had convinced her to close her own bank account and put everything under his name just for simplicity, he had said, just to make things easier. The way he would apologize after, every single time, and she would believe him, because she wanted to believe him, because he was her husband, and she had loved him. I also learned that there were 2 kids from Daniel's previous relationship who stayed with them every other weekend, and that Rachel had tried to protect them too, putting herself between his anger and those children more than once. When she told me that, I had to get up from the table and stand at my kitchen sink for a minute with the water running, just to have something to do with my hands. I had served 8 years in the army. I was a military police officer. I had done 2 deployments and come home and built a quiet life in this small town, and I had told myself that the hardest things were behind me. But standing at that sink, listening to my sister's voice behind me, I felt something shift inside me like tectonic plates. Something very old and very certain. I turned off the water and turned around. "I have an idea," I said. "And I need you to hear me out before you say no." She looked at me warily. "That's never a good start." "I know." I sat back down. "Rachel, we're identical. We've been mistaken for each other our entire lives." She blinked. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said carefully, "that Daniel has never been afraid of you, but he doesn't know me. Not really. He's met me at holidays. He's had dinner with me a few times, but he doesn't know what I'm capable of." I paused. "What if he thought you came home?" The silence that followed was long. "You want to pretend to be me," she said, "just long enough to have a conversation with him." "A conversation." Her voice was flat. "A conversation he will remember." She shook her head immediately. "No. Absolutely not. If something went wrong, nothing is going to go wrong. I have been trained to de-escalate violent situations. I have handled men twice his size. I know how to read a room, and I know how to end a confrontation before it becomes something else." I looked at her steadily. "I need you to trust me." "I trust you completely," she said. "That's not the issue. The issue is him. You don't know what he's like when he's—" "I know exactly what he's like," I said. "That's why I'm not afraid of him." We argued about it for another hour. I told her I wasn't going in to hurt him, not unless he forced the issue. What I wanted was for him to understand, clearly and without any ambiguity, that the situation was over, that Rachel was leaving, that she had someone in her corner, and that any attempt to retaliate or to come looking would have consequences that he was not prepared for. I also told her that I had a friend at the county sheriff's office, that if she wanted to press charges, I would sit with her through every step of that process, that I would help her open her own account, find her own attorney, get her name off the shared lease. I had done enough protective detail work to know the logistics of leaving, and I was prepared to walk through all of it with her. But first, I needed to close the door on his confidence. I needed him to believe, in his bones, that this was finished, that the woman he had spent 4 years controlling was no longer afraid of him, and that the world he had built around her compliance was gone. She finally said yes, quietly, reluctantly, with about 6 conditions attached that I agreed to every one of. We spent the next 2 days at my house. Rachel told me everything she could think of the layout of their home, his routines, his patterns, the things that set him off and the things that settled him. She told me about the gun he kept in the bedroom closet, which made me adjust my plan somewhat. She told me he usually came home around 6 on weekdays, and that he would expect dinner started. She told me what her voice sounded like when she talked to him at the end of a long day. That slight softness she had learned to use, the way she had trained herself to be careful. It made me furious, in a quiet, cold way that I have learned over the years is more useful than the loud kind. On Thursday afternoon, Rachel drove us to her neighborhood in my car. She parked 2 blocks away. I got out alone. I was wearing her jacket, a pale blue zip-up she'd had for years, the one Daniel would recognize. I had borrowed it before, which helped. My hair was the same length as hers, same color. From a distance, in the early evening light, walking up the front path of that house, I was her. The door wasn't locked. I let myself in. The house was quiet. He wasn't home yet. I stood in the entryway for a moment and just looked at the space my sister had been living in. It was a nice house. Objectively good furniture, clean counters, a framed photo of Daniel and Rachel on their wedding day sitting on the hallway table. I looked at her face in that photo for a long moment. She was smiling. She looked like herself. I went to the kitchen and I stood at the counter, and I waited. He came home at 6:17. I heard the door, heard him set his keys down, heard him walk through the entryway. He came into the kitchen and stopped. I turned around. He said, "Hey," casual, tired, like nothing. "Hey," I said. Rachel's voice is slightly higher than mine. I'd been practicing. He opened the refrigerator. "Did you make anything?" "Not yet," I said. He let the refrigerator close, turned to look at me more directly. Something shifted in his expression just slightly, something recalibrating. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I want to talk to you about something." He leaned against the counter. "What's up?" I looked at him for a moment. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders. He had the particular ease of someone who was used to being the largest person in a room and had never had to wonder what that meant for other people. I recognized it immediately. "This isn't going to work anymore," I said. He frowned. "What isn't?" "This." I gestured between us, then at the house. "All of it. I'm done." His jaw tightened. I watched it happen in real time. "Where is this coming from? Does it matter?" "Yeah," he said, and his voice had dropped slightly. "It matters. We had a rough week, Rachel. That doesn't mean." "A rough week," I said. I kept. "You. Is that what we're calling it?" He pushed off from the counter and took a step toward me. I did not move. He stopped. Something in my posture, the way I was standing, maybe, or the fact that I hadn't stepped back registered in him in a way that made him pause. I looked him in the eye and said, "I know about the account. I know about the phone. I know about his arm, the night of the 15th, when you grabbed him because he walked between us at the wrong moment." I watched his face. "I know about all of it." His expression changed. The tiredness dropped out of it. Something harder and wary took its place. "You've been talking to someone." "Yes," I said. "I've been talking to my sister." The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "You're not Rachel." "No," I said. "I'm not." What happened next I'll describe plainly. He took another step toward me, and I let him close some of the distance. And then I showed him, clearly and without drama, that he had made a significant miscalculation. I won't go into every detail. What I will say is that it was brief, that it was controlled, and that when it was over, he was sitting on the kitchen floor with a great deal more information about the situation than he'd had 60 seconds earlier. I crouched down to his level. "Here is what's going to happen," I said. "Rachel is leaving. She has already spoken to a lawyer. She is going to reclaim access to her own finances, and she is going to file a report with the sheriff's office, and you are going to let all of that happen without interference." I held his gaze. "If you go looking for her, I will know. If you call her, I will know. If you so much as drive past her mother's house, I will know. Because I have friends in this county who owe me favors, and I will spend every one of them on making sure that your life becomes very, very complicated." I stood up. "She loved you," I said. "That mattered to her. I want you to understand that she gave you every chance a person can give, and you chose this instead." I picked up my bag. "Don't make any more choices that you'll regret." I walked out the front door, down the path, and 2 blocks to where my car was parked. Rachel was sitting in the passenger seat. She looked at my face when I got in, searching it. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "He's fine. Nobody's calling an ambulance." I started the car. It went the way it needed to go. She nodded slowly. She looked out the window as we pulled away from the curb, and I watched her watch that house get smaller in the side mirror, and then disappear. She didn't cry this time. She just exhaled long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath for 2 years. The weeks after that were not easy. I want to be honest about that, because I think people sometimes hear stories like this one and imagine that once the confrontation is over, everything resolves cleanly, the way it does in movies. It doesn't. Leaving is a process, and it requires 100 small acts of courage from the person doing it, and 100 small acts of steadiness from the people around them. Rachel filed the police report. That was hard. Sitting across from an officer and saying the words out loud, in order, with dates when she could remember them, that took more courage from her than anything I did that Thursday evening. I sat next to her and didn't say anything, because it wasn't my story to tell. It was hers. There were complications with the finances. It took longer than it should have to get her name on her own account, to unwind 4 years of his name being on everything. My friend at the sheriff's office helped connect her with a victim's advocate who helped cut through a lot of the bureaucratic difficulty. I will say that having that advocate made an enormous difference. If you are in a situation like my sister's and you don't know where to start, that is where you start a victim's advocate. They know the system in a way that most people don't, and they are on your side. Daniel did not come looking. I had been fairly confident he wouldn't, and he didn't. I think the Thursday evening conversation had clarified for him that the variables had changed in ways that did not favor him. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Rachel stayed with me for the first month, then she got an apartment 20 minutes away. A 2-bedroom with good light, and a little balcony where she started growing tomatoes in pots, because she had always wanted to do that, and Daniel had said it was pointless. The tomatoes did great. I drove over for dinner one Sunday in October, and she had made pasta from scratch, something she said she hadn't done in years because he didn't like the cleanup. We sat at her kitchen table, and she had candles lit, and there was music playing, and she looked like herself. She looked like the woman who walked into every room like she owned it. She poured us both a glass of wine and she said, without looking at me directly, "I know you did more than you told me about what happened in that kitchen." "I handled what needed to be handled," I said. She nodded. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I used to think that if I just got better at managing him, it would stop. Like it was a problem I could solve if I figured out the right approach." "It wasn't a problem you caused," I said. "I know that now," she said. "It took me a long time to know that." She turned the wine glass in her hands. "The thing that kept me there the longest wasn't the money or even the fear, really. It was shame. I was ashamed that I had let it get that far. I was ashamed to tell people, because I thought they would think less of me. I thought they would wonder why I stayed." I looked at her. The only people who wonder why victims stay are people who have never understood what it actually takes to leave. She smiled a little. "When did you get wise?" "I was always wise," I said. "You just weren't paying attention." She laughed a real laugh, the full one, the kind I had been missing for 2 years without knowing exactly what I was missing. It filled up her apartment like sunlight. Later that night, driving home, I thought about what she had said about shame, about how isolation works not just through locks and monitoring and financial control, but through the way it makes a person feel about themselves. How the most effective prison is the one a person builds around their own story. I thought about the women I had known in my years of service, colleagues, friends, strangers on deployments who had carried versions of my sister's story quietly because they had been made to feel that their suffering was a private failure rather than something that had been done to them. I thought about how many people are sitting right now in houses that have become something else, calculating hour windows, waiting for a night when they can make it to a door. If that is you, or if that is someone you love, I want you to hear this clearly. Leaving is not weakness. Asking for help is not weakness. Telling someone is not weakness. The shame belongs entirely to the person who did the hurting. Not 1 ounce of it belongs to you. My sister called me 3 weeks ago. She had just gotten back from a camping trip with 2 friends from work, the first vacation she had taken without asking anyone's permission in 4 years. She had hiked 8 miles in 1 day, and her legs were destroyed, and she was the happiest she had sounded in longer than I could measure. "I texted you a picture," she said. "Look at it." I looked. It was her, at the top of D. I looked. It was her at the top of a ridge somewhere, wind in her hair, arms spread wide, grinning at whoever was holding the phone. Behind her was nothing but open sky. "You look like yourself," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm starting to remember what that feels like."